All right, welcome everybody. This is your host, Jeffrey Scott Zeiser. This is our first online lecture for History 103 at Cerritos College. The original lecture of this is 5th of October 2025. Of course, I reserve the right to use it in the future if it's any good. All right, so 10% of our class is online, and we're going to have a selection of lectures. I think the math was 5 50-minute classes. It might be more like 6 45-minute ones. We'll see. This is the first time I've taught the class, so we'll see how I like to go. Today, we're going to do a pair, well, this week, next week, Spanish-American War. Today's going to be some of the lead-up and the early engagements. And then next time we'll do the big, there was a couple really big naval and land war on Cuba, which was the main focus of the war, and we'll do that for the next one. If anybody's curious, the book I'm using, I know most people probably are not that curious. That's okay. Let's see if I can show it really quick. Okay, I looked at a lot of books, but this is the one I liked. It's called The Relations of the United States and Spain, the Spanish-American War, by a Rear Admiral, actually, of the U.S. Navy. It's from 1911, I think, which I was looking into books for the war, both open source ones, and this one hit the spot for me, which is enough detail to be useful, and far enough away from the war that it's decently honest. So I enjoy it. So we're going to use that today for our reference. So if you get lost or anything, you can come look at that. As I mentioned when we set up the class, for now I'll probably upload these all to YouTube, but again, I might put them on Twitch later as well. So okay, let's get into it. The war. Okay, so the win is good. Basically, the story starts January 1898. Now, I'm a 20th century person, so that seems kind of recent, but for most of you, it probably does not. This doesn't feel very recent. Right, it's the very end of the 19th century, which we are studying in this class, right? It's the Gilded Age. Writ large. In class, sometimes I make jokes about presidents that people don't know. This was McKinley's War. It's one of the things he's actually famous for. Okay, so let's do some preparations. Initial orders and communications, and some prep. Okay, so then you're Professor, wait, did the war start yet? It did not. The Maine hasn't sunk yet. As we talked about in class already, and we will talk, I think, Tuesday. It depends on the schedule for the semester. See, the last week or this week. We'll do some of the intro to the war, but there's posturing. Now, what that means is, you're like, Professor, wait a minute, if there's preparations for the war, doesn't that mean both sides had a feeling it's happening? Yes. After reading this book, basically, I could say the Spanish were more keen to avoid it. The Americans were more keen to institute it. And interestingly enough, Europe was pretty sure Spain was going to win. It's just if you're curious. In class, we have talked about the theme that the United States at this point wasn't famous for having a standing army. So, and even in this war, I think it's 150,000 volunteers at the start of the war. So, very little professional army, although the Navy is one of the parts that did have a professional bit. So what matters here is the United States government kind of feeling, and they started to make an Atlantic Squadron, which is just gathering up the ships, to maybe just in case the war comes, right? Just in case. Now, a quick note on why we care about this and what this means. The cause of the war is Cuba. Cuba basically had insurrection. And this is roughly 80 years after most of South America had their minor to very, very major wars against Spain, and there's now that pressure in Cuba to also have that war. All right, so basically, you know, war's coming when the Army says, retain all your men. That means you can't leave the military, especially the Navy, if you know issues are coming. The big commanders we care about now, there'll be a Commodore Dewey we'll talk about later. He's pretty interesting. Now, funny enough, what the United States starts with is just drills. They actually go down to Florida. Again, if you've never done the East Coast, Even today, weather and climate matters a lot. They went down to Florida basically to train. The United States Navy, that is, this Atlantic Squadron. And they're just warming up, right? So now, again, even the book points out it is somewhat provocative to steam several of your warships down to Florida, which used to be Spain and is close to Cuba, and start doing live fire drills. That means you're shooting ordnance, right? You're shooting your cannons. But they're starting to gather ships here. And by the way, one of these ships will be the Maine, which is the one that blows up. Okay, and the Americans are topping up their coal supplies, etc. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to add here. Man, I have so many of these. A quick note, too, on the situation in Cuba. Why are they moving ships? Basically, January 12th, 1898, there was the Spanish army cracked down on insurgents. But not even on insurgents, they cracked down on anti-Spanish newspapers. And there was a thought that perhaps this would lead to attacks on Americans, although I'm not sure how founded that is, interestingly enough. Okay, now, funny enough, the admiral gets changed very early in the American story. And this will be relevant later. We'll talk about the new admiral. He had malaria. If you don't know why malaria is not funny, it's what you get from the top tropics, right? And it's like a fever you can never kick. So this admiral will get replaced by a guy called Captain Sampson, who will basically win the war in the Atlantic. All right. Is there anything else from the preparations I want? No, we're doing pretty good. Okay. Now, summary of naval forces. Let's see here. I have so many notes, everybody. I had way too much fun reading this book. Okay, we had the transfer. We have Admiral Sampson got promoted. Good. Okay. I have so many notes. Okay, so, and by the way, I have notes here on Spanish movement too. The Spanish were also trying to gather their fleets, just in case. Now, the U.S. is doing it in Florida. The Spanish were actually doing it in Cadiz and Canary Islands. That's basically Spain. Now, what kind of naval force are we looking at here? Okay, so we have, there's, interestingly enough, the United States and Spain were near peers. That is to say, they're roughly speaking similar navies, similar sizes, similar number of sailors, all of that. The big difference would be the United States generally, if I can give you anything I learned from studying this for the last couple of weeks, the United States was very well stocked. Full of, their ships were full of complements, which means you had guys everywhere you needed them. Lots of ammo, lots of coal, lots of food. High maintenance. And another thing that shocked me when I was reading about this, the U.S. ships had all their guns. The Spanish had several ships, but they weren't armed. For example, the biggest, so the United, for example, at the comparison, the United States had 7 battleships, and a bunch of cruisers. The Spanish basically had 2 major battleships, called the Pelayo and the Carlos V. And either they didn't have armor or their guns weren't mounted. And then their next best ship was basically a cruiser. And if you don't know, your naval ships don't die. Battleships are huge with huge guns. Cruisers are pretty big but faster. Then you have like destroyers. And then in this war they have torpedo boats, which are little annoying ships that shoot torpedoes and can sink everything. So this will become a naval war. But they have similar sized navies. This is why the Europeans, and by the way, most of the Spanish, think they might have a chance of winning. But preparedness is basically the watchword in this war. Okay. And I'm skipping a lot of information about the different kinds of ships. Now, I point this out, the general ignorance in Europe, talking of naval personnel. The funniest thing I read before the war happened, if you ever open this book, again, the relations of the United States and Spain in the Spanish-American War, it's a lot of primary source quotes, which is just so fun. One of my favorite quotes is the Europeans saying, like, United States recruits 3,000 Swedish sailors who like to pay, but they're not going to actually fight, right? Because the United States is we've talked about it already. It's an immigrant country. So the Europeans have this kind of image. There's no way any of these people are actually going to fight when it comes down to it, right? And it would seem like the United States Navy has basically no fighting spirit. And so the Spanish have a 400-year imperial tradition. So how could the United States even fight them? And this is good to keep in mind because again, historians can. That's why I like this one. That's a little bit closer to the events and written by an admiral who came up in the Navy when this happened. It wasn't automatic the U.S. could win this. And the reason I talk about all those ships, literally, 10 years before this, the United States barely had a Navy. Even 5 years before. And a lot of the Navy was sailing ships, or more even funnier, monitors. Monitors, or if you've ever seen the Civil War, where they have those little ships in the armored boats in like the bays with one little turret on it. They even had monitors until this war, and there was still an argument that those were good enough. By the way, they tried to put them in the open sea, didn't go well. So, but people don't really have a positive impression of the United States at this point. Again, it can feel funny looking back in a 21st century metric because we're basically post World War II. In post World War II, the United States is the major naval power. Before that, the United States is barely a naval power. So this can, in the 20th century, kind of looking back on it, late 20th century, looks like the United States is ganging up on Spain or something. It's really a pretty close fight. Basically, had the Spanish maintain their fleet a little better, and apparently Spain was semi-bankrupt. If their fleets had been maintained better and they had more sailors and like enough ammunition and coal and stuff, it would have been a much tighter fight. And we'll talk about it a little bit at the end of the day. There's a battle in the Philippines where you start to see that it is a closer thing. But especially like that kind of timing element and the not being prepared element hits the Spanish pretty hard. But nobody's ready for it. Everybody thinks the Spanish are going to do great. Okay. And I've already started hinting at this one, but let's get some more details. So the Spanish, like I said, the Spanish Navy, same size. And it was considered to be very well prepared. However, they were undertrained. The main Atlantic admiral was a guy called Cervera, and he was well regarded, but he was pounding. He knew. We actually have all of his correspondence. They were saved, all his letters and telegrams. And by the way, they have telegrams. If you don't know what a telegram is, just a wire that you can basically send an email through, except very slowly. But they have near instantaneous communication at this time period. Even the ships do. They can actually like have a cable they leave connected to where they came from in the fleet, and like they can telegraph back, which is crazy. But yeah, so now the world has near instantaneous communication, and we have this Admiral Cervera. We have all of Admiral Cervera's notes, and he's warning them like, "Hey guys, my ships don't have guns. Like my best 3 ships, 2 don't have the right guns, and the crew's not very good. Oh, and so like sometimes their boilers won't work. Again, all ships, if you don't know, are powered by steam, right? Just like our electricity. So if your boilers aren't working, like that's amazing. And steam is a pretty new technology at this point, right? Like 40 years it's been used in the navies. It's a big deal when your ships can't move. And the Spain, I think a third of their ships were in dry dock or couldn't move. So again, it's like in theory the same size fleet. And the government would even say it, because the government loves to do this kind of thing. Like, oh, we are the same size. Look at our fleet. We're doing so great. But some of it's just like propaganda / government guys, getting paid. Now, that's not to say there isn't any preparedness here. Do I have this on here? Oh, I do. The Spanish had a lot of soldiers, everybody. It's on the land, too. I think the numbers here, let's see. Spain and the islands had 150,000 men. Cuba had almost 300,000 soldiers. This is just the army and irregulars. Philippines had 50,000 men. Puerto Rico had 10,000 men. Overall, there was 500,000 soldiers under Spanish command. So again, the Spanish actually outnumbered the Americans on land. 2-1, I think. When the war started, there was like 100,000 in the American army. And I think they recruited 200,000 more. So the navies were matched, and then the army, the Spanish had twice as much. So again, it's not automatic, oh, the U.S. is just going to roll. Nope, that's us looking back, knowing what happened, and rewriting it. Now, it's not all good. I have a whole page here. It's called Military Forces in Cuba. There was an insurgency, and they're fighting rebels, right? One trouble of fighting rebels. Well, Cuba's semi-tropical, right? It's jungle. So the #1 cause of deaths in the Spanish army, this is from 1895 to 1898, I think they have 80,000 casualties that are just sickness. And casualties doesn't mean they're all dead, but like they're either sick enough they can't fight, or they get sent home or something like that. So the Spanish have this giant army, and the weather's killing them. Now, this is another thing to point out. We don't always really remember this. Disease is the number one killer in war until the 20th century, by far. Really, there isn't. Weapons are less deadly than sickness. Even the ships, the American ships, they have warnings on sanitation on all these huge ships that are in this battle, because they're at sea for a long time. And it's like, if you mess up sanitation, everybody gets sick and dies. Right? That means stay really clean, flush your poop. And again, we don't think about this, but disease is a great killer then. It's a great killer now. So again, nothing to keep in mind. Okay. Those are my relics. Excuse me, everybody, from the normal slide. Okay, strategy. Strategic considerations of Spanish forces. Now, we haven't really talked conflict in this class. But when we say strategy, that means the giant top-down view, right? The 1,000-yard view. What are we saying here? We're skipping the strict when the war started. The war starts in April, so we're talking about January. So from January to April, there's prep. The Maine gets sunk. In Havana Harbor, again, we'll talk about that in class more. We're kind of blowing past it in this. The United States finally decides to declare war April 19th, 1989. Now, it takes a couple months to declare war. Why? Basically, the U.S. demands Spain frees Cuba to be independent. Now, you're going to go, Professor, that sounds great. What they're saying is free Cuba to be under United States control. That's what they're saying. Even there was a quote I was reading from one of the primary sources. A Spanish admiral made a comment that we are the Spanish. If the Americans said we're here to conquer Cuba in diplomacy, we would understand. Like, it'd be a more honest negotiation. We understand conquest, but the Americans are basically using double talk to pretend they're not conquering Cuba. And we talked about this in class already, right? But it's kind of the American weakness. Sometimes it's a PR issue and it's a representative government issue, but it's also kind of a not always straight shooting. The Spanish were looking for more straight shooting. Probably if it had been, who knows, the war might have been avoided or something. So, but there's this, the war gets declared and the Spanish have to decide what the heck they're going to do. And so it basically, they're at a place called Cape Verde, which is an island off Africa, and the admiral is told, wait, let's see what happens. And again, the poor guy, the poor Spanish admiral, Zavada, he's like, I'll do this. And I think I read 10 telegrams from him today saying, here's all the things I need to win. Please wait, please prepare this. And by the way, him and all his captains said, let's go back and wait in Spain until we have all our ships. Then we can go fight. Because he's like, even if we lose Cuba, who cares? If we have our navy, we can actually fight the Americans. But the politicians first didn't give him a plan and then said, no, go with your incomplete fleet, which is a couple cruisers and some torpedo boats. And they're like, just steam to America, it'll be fine. All right. Now, there's a whole section on just how to defend Havana. Havana is the capital of Cuba. It's a quite rich city. It's also where the Maine sunk. Funny enough, there's a hypothetical where the war could have ended really quick. Because that guy Sampson, the Atlantic admiral, he's Cervera's opposite on the American side. He just wanted to steam up to Havana and just shell it and make it surrender. And just end it quick. Like, why are we going to fight a year? We can attack the city, it'll be fine. We can try it. Like, worst case, we lose. And that's the American strategy. Of course, Washington rejects it. The author I read really wanted it to be so. I'll have to quote him right. Chadwick, Admiral Chadwick was like, man, they should have just let him go. And you'll see this in a lot of this story. The admirals all have their heads on very straight. The Spanish admirals are very keenly aware of what's coming. And they actually had some good strategy, but generally the politicians torpedo them. Naval joke, everybody. But the American politicians would prevent this a couple times too, but generally the more logistics support one's the day. Now, Spain makes some strategic missteps, as we already mentioned. For example, sending half your navy out would be a strategic misstep. But also the state of supplies of their ships, the timing of when they send them, these are all things that were not profitable for old poor Spain. Now, public opinion and strategic decisions. Now, I just have this in here. That is to say, how did people view it? Well, both sides have different opinions. The Spanish felt hard done by, so the public and in the colonies, interestingly enough, were all pretty pro-war. In the way that the Spanish were being attacked, not attacking, they felt it was pretty just. In the America, the newspapers ginned it up a lot, but you could argue the Americans were mostly for it. But this does affect strategic decisions. For example, even though it's good strategy to say abandon Cuba, right? Just don't send your fleet there at all. They can go to San Juan, and it's San Juan de. Oh man, my brain's on fire right now. Puerto Rico, right? San Juan de Puerto Rico is where they were thinking of going. Like, we'll get our whole fleet ready. We'll go to San Juan. It's halfway there. We don't have to. We're closer to Spain. We could attack America. We don't have to go to Cuba and get attacked. But that's not popular. Does this make sense? So a lot of these decisions that get made are popular decisions. Very rarely are those good military decisions. The Spanish view, we've already been talking about it. The broad strokes is, though, the admirals knew they weren't ready. And the government was just demanding they go anyway. Now, there's a whole lot of fun correspondence here. And I won't quote most of it because there's just so much. There's so much. I'm looking at it, though. I don't see if there's any missteps I missed. I have so many notes, everybody. I had so too much fun of this. No, it's good. Oh, and I will have to say, they do mention for strategic Spanish steps, the fleet in the Philippines, led by a guy called Manojo, is they had a chance to reinforce it. They just had a fleet, I think it was hanging out in Egypt or something, and they just didn't send it. So the Spanish had some chances where, like, man, they could have done something. Yes, they definitely could have. Okay. Anything else I want here? No. Let's see here. Logistical and operational Spanish fleet. Okay, Spanish fleet in the Atlantic's biggest challenge is literally some of their ships couldn't make it, right? The level of maintenance was much lower. Probably the most impressive one, there was one of the American cruisers went from, it steamed before the war started, from San Francisco all the way to Florida and made it just fine. Even the American fleets from the Pacific, right? They went from, like, they sent I think it was the Baltimore, one of the cruisers, went from San Francisco to Hawaii to Japan to China and met the fleet. So, but the Americans just did it. Their ships didn't break. The Spanish would have, like, they start steaming and, like, oh, that ship's not going to run, its boilers are going to explode. The boilers explode. Like, oh, we got to tow it back to Spain. So the maintenance issue, and the author really points out the difference of engineering passion, right? The Spanish, and we'll see later, they built some things in this war. Some of their guns were quite good, etc. But the average American sailor, like, it was easier to find engineers. Funny enough, the most under-crewed part of the Spanish ships was engineering. Now, if you've never studied war, what's engineering, professor? It's all the mechanical stuff making the ship run, but especially the engines, right? Engines, electricity, right? Make sure that the fundamentals of the ship are working. And if you think about it, if you're to see all these years, it really matters. Okay. So the beginning of hostilities. No, I skipped that. That's all right. All right. I've got so many notes. Stand by, everybody. Okay, so beginning hostility. So April 21st, 1898 is when they start. And they start in Key West, funny enough, in Florida. So the fleet is called the North Atlantic Fleet. And it's got 2 battleships, 10 cruisers-ish, and a bunch of smaller auxiliary ships. Now, why wouldn't you care as much about auxiliary ships? At this time, there's a big gap in seaworthiness between the big ships and little ships. the big ships do much better. They're just like cutting edge technology. Now the goal here basically is a blockade of Cuba, and we'll see. Practically speaking, there's so much detail I can't cover. It's basically steaming up to Havana and 3 or 4 other ports, and forcing them to be closed. This makes you, if somebody tries to come in, especially a Spanish ship, you seize it, and you, like on the old days with like privateers, you put your crew on it, you sail it to Key West, you sell it. Funny enough, there's actually a Supreme Court decision during this period that like you can't sell ships, we can't really do privateering anymore. I'm not sure about that. So there's an argument over can you just seize ships anymore. The authors says basically if they're supporting a city you're attacking, it's fine. But the question becomes, before you declare war, can you do it? And it is a good question. All right, so in the blockade, there isn't a lot of fights. It's mostly just seizing ships. That's basically it. And the Spanish know this fight has started. And these ports are all very deep, the Cuban ports. And Cuba's huge, by the way. I think Cuba's 600-700 miles long. It's gigantic. So even just like steam, they can't actually blockade all of Cuba. They're blockading southern Cuba. Why? It's too big. There's a lot of other ports that you can steam around and into. And like at this point, Cuba has railroads across it. It's a partial blockade, but they're doing their best. Don't care about gunboat excursions. But yeah, several Spanish ships get captured. I'm assuming anyone else want to cover that. No, I'm doing pretty good. There's just some funny stories, I guess. There's a couple, like, we talked about spies earlier. Actually, in another class we talked a lot about it. Well, there's not a big difference between adventurers, spies, and newspapermen. In this case, funny enough, they actually start sneaking newspapermen into the mainland to like get information. Which one of them is a guy called Summerford. It's very funny. There's a whole little vignette about these guys who sneak in. But it starts with pretty basic. It's not a lot of fighting. Now, the big fighting we're going to do today, and I'm going to check my time. Oh, good, I'm doing great. Okay, so in the Atlantic, not a lot of fighting started yet. Actually, most of the fighting starts in Manila. Okay, so there's an admiral, or commodore. Sorry, he's a promotion during war, so he doesn't get to be an admiral yet. Dewey, and in April, this is the Asiatic Squadron, and you might be curious, Professor. Wait a minute. What territory did the United States have in Asia at this point? Hawaii had not technically been annexed yet, so none. They basically had to hang out in Hong Kong, and then once the war starts, they have nowhere to park. And this fleet is all cruisers. Why are cruisers any good? They have decently big guns, and they're pretty fast. So the Pacific is huge. You don't want to sail a slow boat across it. I didn't even mention it for the Spanish ships in the Atlantic. Some of their best ships are so slow, they can't stay with the fleet. Now, communication is a little bit off, but this fleet was ready to go basically as soon as the war started. And the Philippines is decently close to Hong Kong. So they show up, the war gets declared, and they basically pick up the old consul, a guy called Consul Williams from the Philippines, and then they just steam to Manila Bay. Okay. And then the Spanish, of course, say we're going to defend against American aggression till the last. And funny enough, the Spanish feel especially a bit of, we could say, treachery. It's like, why are you attacking us now, right? Come on now. And this battle will happen in a place called Manila Bay. The picture here is not the best. But there's giant bays here in the Philippines, which they're basically inland, but they're big enough to fight a naval battle in and super deep. It's like, for example, Manila Bay is 30 nautical miles long. It's gigantic. There's a bunch of very good ports around it. So, and then the Spanish have to decide their strategy, because they know it's coming too. And then they have to figure out where to defend. Funny enough, the best defense probably would have been literally defending the city of Manila. But they let the governor veto it because the city might get attacked. And the city, sadly, for the Spanish, had modern guns. It probably would have worked pretty good. My author here, back to his name, Admiral Chadwick, definitely thought the Spanish could have at least got a draw if they would have fought in the Manila batteries right in front of them. Another thing he pointed out, which is interesting too, the U.S. didn't actually want to conquer the Philippines. I know it sounds funny. If you took another class of mine, it's called, I teach at Long Beach State, it's called 307, Asia Studies 307, Modern Asia. We talk about that even the British didn't necessarily intend to conquer India. They just won some battles and had land. It sounds almost funny, but history can be funny like that. So the United States, I don't think, was expecting to conquer the Philippines. They were thinking maybe we'll sink the fleet if we get lucky, because these are just some cruisers. They didn't think it was going to work. Admiral Chadwick, the author I have, points out the Spanish. Look how big these islands are, everybody. Just Manila Bay has like 15 good ports. The Spanish could have just gone to the southern island and parked their fleet, and it would have been a draw. Does that make sense? Like, there's an argument the Spanish could have just retreated a little bit and bought time. And even if they lost the war, they could have maybe, say, only lost Cuba or something. By committing to this battle in not a very good way, the Spanish basically lose the Philippines forever. Now, Manila was quite good. It actually had modern guns, and it mentions in my book these are like 10-inch breech loading rifles. That just means they're modern guns where you can open the back and shoot them. But these are bigger than any of the guns had on the American ships, so it could have been very important. And they also talked about mines. Funny enough, this whole war started about a ship hitting a mine, in theory. And the admiral's like, "Can we please get some mines? We know they're coming in a harbor. That'd be great." He doesn't get enough. And as we find out, these water mines you have to mount on the ground, and the bay is too deep, Manila Bay, and you couldn't have mounted mines anyway. Oops. So they expect the hostilities to come, but because of the civil and political considerations, the Spanish decide to defend not Manila, but a place called actually they don't defend Subic, they defend Cavia, another little place. So they pick another port that has no defense. It has an arsenal, but not a lot of strong defenses, and they decide to defend that instead. Okay, and see, the United States, what do? They basically steam into the bay at night. And remember, everybody, this is like, there's no computers or anything. These people doing it just by like lights and like night vision. They're just, we'll steam into the bay. So the Americans steam into the bay, and they figure out what the Spanish are in the morning. And by morning I mean, and they're shooting at some coastal guns. They're basically in a nice long formation. In the old days, you used to just string your ships out. And these 5 cruisers find the Spanish fleet. They're actually hiding in a harbor. And they sail past them like 7 times. And they're shooting at each other. I think the first battle was 2 hours. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'll notice here. Okay, so there's a lot of little detail I'm not covering. But the Spanish strategy basically was to be in a little bay. I'll actually draw with a pen. They were in a bay, something like this. And they have an arsenal/fort here. And they're shooting guns off here, and they have their ships here, floating in the bay. So the Americans are just steaming outside the bay like this, trying to shoot inside it. And they do that for 2 hours. Now, funny enough, they're not sure, the Americans weren't sure they're winning. It took a while for any of these ships to sink. And we find out later, this guy did a lot of research, the average hit rate for the Americans was about 2%. Let me say it again. The hit rate was 2 to 5%. They think it could be slightly higher because it's hard to tell if like a ship explodes the whole way. But they missed a bunch. So they shoot at each other for 2 hours straight, and they sink less than half the Spanish ships. Eventually, though, the Americans figure out they didn't do badly. Actually, the Americans took almost no damage and almost nobody died. And after 2 hours, they had lunch. They basically had a breakfast break, and several of the Spanish ships exploded. And they're like, "Hey, I think we're winning." And then they steam into this harbor and go, "Hey, you want to surrender?" And 2 out of the 3 of the big ships surrender. And then they figure out the rest of the harbor. So the tactics, again, it's not the greatest tactic ever to like put yourself in a harbor not moving with a ship, right? But the Spanish didn't feel like they had a choice. However, they're fighting in a place that's very bad defenses. It didn't work quite good. Let's see what else I want to cover. I read a bunch of these first-hand reports today, everybody. But funny enough, there was this first port they're fighting at did surrender. And they had decent relations with the Spanish. They got them to scuttle their ships. And then the city of Manila itself eventually also retreats or surrenders. Let's see here. See anything else I want to add? No, the Battle of Manila was good. But yeah, basically the whole harbor here, it's a big circle harbor, is surrounded with guns, so the Americans have to spend much time getting them to surrender. But they mostly don't have to fight after they win the naval engagement. Again, everybody's surprised. Now, what happened here, what's interesting about it? Well, the U.S. squadron obviously were better seamen, right? The Spanish ships didn't even move. And again, remember, if we're hitting with only like a 2 to 6% hit rate, and at some point, actually, in the battle, the Americans even decided, let's just put our anchors down and shoot without moving to see if we can hit better. And there's even a story where, like, a little, like a tugboat. They think it's a torpedo boat. It's just a tugboat. It comes out and, like, zooms right past the lead American ship called the Olympia. And they spend all this time trying to shoot it. It turns around again, beaches itself. Everybody escapes, and the ship's not sunk. Later, they fix it. It's just a private boat. It's not even a military boat. They just thought it was because it's flying a giant Spanish Empire flag. But anyway, the point of that is, if you're moving, it's very hard to hit, right? So the Spanish fleet just like dropping anchor. The fight is much shorter that way. But this worked, right? The Americans have better seamanship, aim. Both were bad, but the Spanish is like not even single-digit percentage. It's very bad. And then basically they use the British, the Americans did, to demand surrender. If not, we'll have to bombard the city, basically. But they get a victory, and they basically get the Philippines to surrender. Again, like I said, America was somewhat shocked about it. And to show you how long it takes, let's see here. Yeah, they arrive at Manila May 1st. This is when the battle... they don't even send an expeditionary force, the United States, until May 29th. Like, it took a month for the U.S. to just go like, oh, we conquered the Philippines? Yeah, we got a fleet there. And by the way, the fleet to get home, quote unquote, would have to sail over to California. So it's like, I guess the fleet just hangs out. Yeah, we hang out. So the fleet conquered, this is very rare actually, where a fleet action by itself conquered a colony. But it took a month just to get the expeditionary force out, which is pretty funny. Okay. How am I doing on time? 38. Okay, we'll do a little bit of the Atlantic. Now, by the way, the reason I bring this up too, the Manila stuff, the Asian fight, shocking. Nobody expected it. The Americans didn't expect it. The Spanish didn't expect it. People didn't think there was going to be a war in Asia, right? So this is kind of that early signs we're getting of the next, like the 20th century wars are going to be interesting. Because in the old days, it would take a couple months to even know there was a war in Asia. And it had happened before, by the way. Napoleonic Wars, for example. A bunch of Europeans fought in Asia, but there wasn't any colonies yet, so they weren't really fighting. There was like a couple Portuguese cities and a couple, like the Philippines, but the Spanish mostly didn't fight. So there'd be a couple fights, but not a whole lot. So it was it's new that like these fights got bigger. Scale is what the part is pretty impressive. Okay, now Sampson is the admiral around Cuba. Let's see if there's anything I want to cover for here. Okay, so the Spanish Admiral Cervera started to move out from Cape Verde. And remember, everybody has spies at this point, and since there's telegraph, we think cell phones are bad, everybody. Telegraphs are the same, right? Like, as soon as they leave, you start going, you have your spy send a message like, the Spanish fleet's coming. And by the way, the Spanish did the same thing back. So they decided to move east, trying to go find the fleet. Let's see if there's anything else I want to add. Okay. Let me see here. So then they go for San Juan, which is the natural place. Yeah, naval operation San Juan. Here we go. And San Juan is, we're talking about Puerto Rico, obviously. So they're going for San Juan Harbor. Again, they're trying to basically do what we just saw in the Philippines. So the goal was basically get rid of their batteries and attack some of the men of war. That just means a military boat. Let's see if there's anything else to add here. So basically, the Americans surprised them. Okay, this is funny enough. It's another night attack. Do I have it here? Yes. May 12th to May 12th, actually, they surprised the port at 2 a.m. So they start firing at 5 a.m. So it's very common to do this kind of attack. So they're just shelling coastal batteries because there's not really a fleet. There's a couple disabled ships, basically. Okay, let's do this on ad here. No, we don't care about that. Okay, they're shelling it. They haven't invaded it yet, though. Okay, so May 15th, here are the initial movements. Again, it's an attempt to catch the Spanish fleet in the open. That's what they really wanted to do. So they're trying to catch it as it's steaming to the Americas. And funny enough, they went around them, and these ships did get there. But they did not manage to catch them. Because they're trying to go to another port in Cuba, Santiago de Cuba, right? So, again, if you don't know any Spanish, most of you do, generally speaking, right? If it's a very common Spanish city name, what you do is you give where it is, right? So, which Santiago? Oh, it's de Cuba. Okay, it's the Cuban Santiago. Yeah. So, they basically try to get there and catch the fleet. Now, if you're curious, they do not actually catch it. So, the Spanish squadron basically puts off April 29th. And it goes for it. They have to actually stop several places, including Martinique, which is it's in the Caribbean, but it's French. Several of their ships break, and they have to tow them, which is quite sad. But then they hear about the American fleet at Puerto Rico, which is where they were going. So they go, all right, we're not going to go to San Juan with the squadron there. So they decide to sneak around. They basically go to Venezuela and then north and try to sneak into Cuba. Because, again, it's not that easy to catch a ship, everybody. Even nowadays. But in the old days, you have to literally find it on the vast ocean, be fast enough to catch it, and then shoot at it with cannons. So I guess it's not that common. So they had a very hard time getting... They did not sail with full provisions, the Spanish. And they did their best to get there. Let's see. But they managed to get to Santiago de Cuba without a fight. And they're happy to defend Cuba. So the fleet makes it, but it's only about 6 ships. And they're not very big ones, because they left all those back in Spain. Okay, is there anything I want to hear? Let me see. There's a lot of data on interception, but I don't know if I care. No, there's so much here about trying to catch them in the attempt. They eventually do fight a naval battle, but not today. Where are we looking? Nope, I think I got enough for now. So basically they don't catch them, everybody. Congratulations. So that's the beginning of the war. There's so much I read about this that I'm nearly just like, where does it all go? There's so much. Okay, but this is to give you the warm-up. I even have pictures here that show like sail ships versus ironclads. This is actually from a book we'll use in a couple weeks. Okay, I'm not going to call it a propaganda book. It has great pictures. Let's just say that, right? So stuff like this is like a post hoc kind of picture, everybody, to go like, the Spanish and us. The Spanish had ships like this too. By this, I mean, you can't see my mouse, right? Modern ships, very old ships. Now, but funny enough, both sides actually still had some of these knocking around. They were not used for almost anything. even civilian ships at this point all had steam power. That's why, for example, there's a lot of ships that get pressed into service and they slap guns on them. Having just a cargo ship with guns is better than one of these. These are basically useless by this point. Okay, so that's the first half. I'm going to put up. This will be in a publicly available place, probably on Canvas, and the noted assignment will also be with it. So please take a look at that and respond to it. I'll give us a lot of time. Probably this will be. I'd like to give at least 5 days, so that'll be normal. If you've got any questions or problems about this, bring them up in class. I'm more than happy to answer them. We also have office hours at regular time. Otherwise, I will see you next week for the next one. Peace.